principle, like a foundational principle, is that pain is very complicated. It's very complex. And if we go off of that and accept that uncertainty, then I think we could, use some strategies in order to help people feel better.
Hey, this is Cate with the Thrive with Cate podcast, formerly the Yoga Healer podcast, and I'm here today with Maxim Resnick. And I found Max on YouTube in my search for how to relieve chronic, debilitating hip pain that's been with me for a long time. And I've done a lot of things, and I was getting to the point where I noticed that I was really limiting my range of motion. And so I was looking on YouTube for a number of different ways of thinking about it and different ways of moving. And that's where I found Max's videos, and they're great. And I think I was looking at hip labral tear, or FAI. And Max, you have a story too of somewhat similar debilitating hip pain. We all know that if you go to the doctor about it, they're going to have you get an MRI, and then they'll send you to an orthopedic surgeon. And sometimes this is actually not what's going to help the underlying issues. So why don't you tell a little bit about your story with debilitating hip pain and what made you make these videos on the internet for people like me?
Sure. Well, thanks, Cate. Thank you for having me, first of all. And thank you for sharing which keyword landed you on my video so I could target that, right? Yeah, so my story is pretty similar to yours. I actually started my careerhood as an attorney. When I was in law school in my first year, hip pain was just destroying me. I couldn't play basketball, couldn't hike, couldn't do the things I enjoyed. So, I went the traditional route. I went to see a doctor. He's like, ice it for a little bit, right? Do all the basic things, get some physical therapy. None of that worked. I went back. We did the whole MRI thing. I had a hip labral tear, I had FAI. And he's like, you could do some more physical therapy, or, if that doesn't get better, you can get surgery. And that probably started me on my journey of like doing chiropractic stuff and non-traditional physical therapy for another year or so. Went back to the doctor, found a good one now in this is New York City, so Mount Sinai, or one of those premier hospitals. And like the surgeon was doing labral tear surgery for professional tennis players, so she was good. So she did the MRI. I went there, and this time they did the MRI, but also did an injection, right? So theoretically, if the pain goes away when you get the injection during the MRI,
and this is like corticosteroid injection.
Yeah, they do it with the scan, and I think the theory is if the pain goes away, then you have the labral tear, right? And that's what's causing the pain. That's the more relevant part. That's what's causing the pain. It's the labral tear. But as anybody in pain knows, it's really hard, right, to know like if it's really gone, and maybe certain movements feel better, but certain don't. So the brain starts obsessing about all that. And did the pain go away enough for me to get surgery, right? So I don't know. She convinced me. I scheduled the surgery, and then I went back to the office for, every day, kind of like checking the hip to see if the pain was gone. Am I really going through the surgery, doing research. And then I found this guy who became a mentor for me in California, Matt Shu from Upright Health. And he had this great video about, just big letters, I don't buy FAI. And that's just kind of what sparked it for me. And, a light bulb just clicked. I canceled the surgery 2 days before. And then I went on my path 10 years later. I've just been learning about movement, the brain, pain, everything. And I love it so much that I'm, transitioning out of the law. Still do it part-time because got to pay the bills and the mortgage is expensive. But this is where I'm at now, and trying to grow an audience and all that.
So FAI, just for people who don't know, this hip impingement, femoral acetabular impingement, FAI. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So I love Upright Health, and what his name's Matt Shu, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, his videos are fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about what is happening with fascia and how movement patterns become limited and lack of circulation in that head of where the femur bone sits in the hip socket and the acetabular, and why surgery doesn't actually fix the circulation fascia issue.
Sure. I mean, I've been down the fascia road. My belief about pain, my philosophy about just pain generally is that we have to start, or I help with what I work with clients. I think we always want an explanation, right? We always want a reason for why we're in pain. And I think the pain is the most, and that's why I love it. And I read about it all day long. And, I try to help people with it. It's very complicated. It's very complex, brain, nervous system, muscle tissue. There's so many things, So I think just starting with people with the underlying principle, like a foundational principle, is that pain is very complicated. It's very complex. And if we go off of that and accept that uncertainty, then I think we could, use some strategies in order to help people feel better, right? So just going back to FAI and labral tear, and even like fascia, like anatomies and the chains, right? We're not really trying to fix anything. We're not trying to change anything. We're just trying to help people feel better, right? Like if you're not in pain, the labral tear doesn't matter. FAI doesn't matter. And arguably even some of these like nuance, fascial lines and stuff also don't matter to practitioners. Yes. Right. To me and you, to nerd out on these things 100%, but I think for the general public who just want to feel better, just want to feel better, right? They don't really care so much about that. So I think that's so I don't really know that much, I haven't dug so much into that area. My thing more is for people on a case-by-case basis, how do we make this person feel better and not worry so much about what's going on inside and worrying more about, can I go for a walk or a hike or, do whatever they want to do.
But my guess is how you do that is actually working at the level of fascia, right? Because you're increasing movement and flexibility and mindfulness of exploratory movement, which will break up the pattern that's holding how the muscles and joints are aligned and the nerves are aligned.
Probably, again, like I just find with so many people with my own practice, like the more I zoom out, the better I move, like, for example, like something simple, like a forward bend, right? Or like even a bench press and strength training, like you can analyze the hell out of it, right? Or you could put some weight on and just try to do it, and zoom out and when I'm working with people, it's like, what's stopping them from doing it? Is it a fear, right? Like so many people are scared to bend forward, right?
Yeah.
So that's more psychological, right?
Yeah.
Is it like a really, like you say, there's some, muscular restriction, right? Are the hamstrings and calves so stiff, that they won't, or is the other side of the hip, right? The hip flexors and the quads not able to contract to allow the body to bend forward. That would be my take on it. Like I've worked with someone closely that, I read that is that the Meyer book, right? Is that kind of what the anatomy trains?
Oh, I haven't read it.
No, yeah. So that's like, apparently that's like the Bible for the fascia. I mean, I worked with somebody who really recommended it and I tried reading it. Honestly, it was just, it was dense.
Yeah.
And like, again, zooming in sometimes I feel like gets me, especially with like my brain and the way I obsess and just think about things so deeply. I find just for me, sometimes it's better to, and I find that with other people too.
But I can also see how like yoga, right? Things like yoga, if we look at the history of primal movement into organized movement, like more mentally driven movement, right? So if we look at like primal movement or how we moved when we were primates, right? Climbing, jumping, running, crawling, right? All of these primate driven movements that as we 10,000 years ago moved away from the jungle and started farming. So we've got 10,000 years of agriculture, right? And that's where we start to see degeneration of the human physiology, is with, we have a store of food, so we don't have to move as much. We don't have to fast as much, right? We're not fasting and foraging. We're not moving. We're not hunting, right? Those are all now becoming more recreational to some degree, right? Because now we have a store of food, and then we see a decrease in different types of movement unless there's a conscious practice. And then you see the rise of systems like yoga and Tai Chi come out of these post-agricultural societies where there's a group of people now living in an area, and now there's a sophistication of the intellect, and there's this desire to keep the channels really open in this diversity of functional movement, so we can hang and we can swing and we can skip and we can jump and we can run and we can crawl and we can reach for the thing, right? I see so many elderly people, they can't reach for the thing on the high shelf anymore, the spine shrink, and the fascia is just unlocking the pattern. So we know after like a few weeks of not moving in a certain direction, the fascia locks the muscular tissue into a pattern. So if we look at Tai Chi or yoga or Qigong or any of these movement patterns in a post hunter-gatherer society, it's like they're mimicking, right? All of these movements. And then out of that, then we see this rise in sport, right? With like the Romans, and how we now have these gladiators and sports and fighting and organized matches with soccer and balls and things like, right, where we now have sport, which is often the same patterns again and again. So if we just regress, or not regress, but take one step back towards organized movement like yoga, it's wild how a lot of the advanced postures they put pressure of like bone to bone pressure that just breaks up any of the patterning that's happening around the joints. That's like kind of locking everything in place and creating the rubbing or creating. So if we just look back to like why the tear might not matter, if we have a tear in our labrum or the cartilage around our where our leg bones go into our hip bones, right? If we have movement and we have circulation, there's now, I mean, my sense is like detoxification of the joint and nutrition in.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love talking about like our ancient, ancestors. I mean, definitely, right? Like, I think there's a book by like Dan Lieberman, I think it's called The History of Movement or something like that. And he talks about how there's like studies that show, homo, like back in the, when the first few humans that they got bones on had hip arthritis, so it's nothing new, like we've always had these degenerative conditions in our bones and in our bodies. But now we have very expensive technology that's able to identify it and tell us that that's the reason for our problems, but, going back to hip pain, all pain, being complicated and part of this kind of multifactorial thing. It's like, but when you see it, it's very hard. I think, one of the hardest things with hip labral tears and just working with people who have them is like a person in authority shows you this thing on the X-ray MRI, and it's like, this is like, we are taught that is how it works, so a lot of getting people to feel better and move better is deconditioning some of these false beliefs, and it's very hard, I mean, we're taught about it really early, but and then when you have an acute injury, like you break your bone in a car accident, those images are very helpful, right? Like they need to be looked at so we know what's happening and the doctors can help. But chronic pain and chronic movement problems are just a different animal, and it needs to be looked at, like, I think it needs to be looked at like that differently. Yeah.
So what do you find in terms of working with people in terms of the mental, again, it's chronic, it's maybe there's chronic inflammation underlying it, and what are you finding are some of the barriers which become access points into their healing?
I mean, I was thinking about this the other day, and I'm always changing the way, like things have helped me, and now it's like, how do I get people, right? How do I help others too? Because everybody's different. But I do think no matter what, in the beginning, it's like, if you had to look at like a pie graph and say what's the percentage of psychological versus physical, right? I think it's 50-50 eventually, but I think in the very beginning, it's like 90% psychological, right? Because again, there's these barriers are so psychological, right? Because if you always think like anytime first of all, it's normal to feel things in the body, right? Discomfort, pain, that's part of being a human, right?
Mhm.
So if every
Yeah.
time you feel some discomfort in the hip and you know you have that labral tear, you know, that MRI that shows you have labral, and like you're always going back to the structural reason for your pain, it's
Mhm.
very hard to do
Mhm.
anything, right? And then there's this feedback loop in the brain because the brain
Mhm.
sends us pain signals when you feel threatened, when the nervous system is threatened, when the body's threatened, right? Or it feels like there's danger.
Mhm.
And now the very like that's the first step, you know, for, in my
Mhm.
opinion, right? Getting
Yeah.
people in the right space psychologically, and then slowly getting more movement in, right? Because then you don't fear things, right? It's like again, like going back to the forward bend example, how can we improve your forward bend if every time you practice it, you get some discomfort and you freak out, right? Like the whole body gets into panic mode. Let me
Yeah.
call my doctor, let me, whatever. So that's why I think it's the first, and people are very I mean, like it's very difficult, right? And
Yeah.
they automatically think, oh, you're saying the pain's all in my head. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the science of pain is that it comes from the brain. It's a scientific fact, right? So and some people are more prone to it because of, some things you were saying before, right? Like the trauma or like the, the way we're raised, behavioral stuff. Like, I don't think one of the most interesting things I think is I see people all the time and we do these assessments and two people can have the exact same movement patterns. One
Yeah.
person is in debilitating hip pain, the other person's not at all, and they both
Yeah.
have labor pains, right? So
Yeah. Well, and in Ayurvedic medicine, which is my background, it depends how much vata is aggravated. So we look at things in terms of elements and constitutions. So you have air, ether, fire, water, earth. So people who have more kapha have less pain. Like people have
okay.
more water, earth element, and there's, it's more of like the endomorphic slow digester, deep metabolizer, person with a lot of endurance, person that has a naturally more like complacent, laid back mental profile compared to
Yeah,
like the
that's not me.
right or
Yeah,
like the
yeah,
vata pitta
yeah.
types that are highly sensitive. Even
Mhm.
when a baby's born, they measure this with the Apgar score. It's like how sensitive, how
Mhm.
awake, how alert. So those people are going to have more exploration in the subtle body arts like Tai Chi, yoga, meditation, to experience the subtler levels of consciousness and the subtler levels of physiological integration. But they're also flip side, right? Razor's edge of part of the reason they get that is because they have more sensitivity to pain.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting because you need, right? It's like you need that. And I find that with people, not even in the movement pain context, just like people who are more chill and laid back, probably need a little push, right, to like get things going. Whereas someone like me, I'm already just like, I'm ready to go. I wake up, I'm driven. So like I find the things that help me are the things that calm me down and
Yeah.
bring me down, and that's where I'm balanced. But like,
Yeah.
friends or that's why it's so hard to give people advice, right? And say, hey, do this thing, even when people. But I do find that people in chronic pain generally are more people like, I think me, maybe you, right? Like, or like have that energy that you're describing, or very much perfectionists and go-getters, and they need like. That's why the movement stuff is, I think movement. What I in the very beginning, I think the best movement practices are anything that calms the nervous system down and just
Yeah.
like brings people down. They've already been trying to do more, get my hip doing that rotation, like overthinking it,
Yeah.
whereas like, let's just get into the body. Like when I work with people and they join my program and all the emails, I could just send one response and be like, you're overthinking it, right? Like
Yeah.
just like, should I do this? Should I do that? Should I do this? And that's the hardest part, doing less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's going more global than specific, right? So like one of the
Right.
exercises I got from Donna Farhi, who's a world-renowned yogi, the yogis listening will know Donna and her books, is it's like you bend your knees, you're on the floor against a wall, you bend your knees, you put the ball of your base of your foot on the wall, heels are on the ground, knees are
Okay.
bent, and you just rock the nervous system. You just push into your toes and you get the cerebrospinal fluid moving up and down.
Your feet are on the wall.
Yeah, so you're like knees
Yeah,
are
yeah, yeah, I
bent,
got it.
heads on the floor, backs and heads on the floor, and you just push into your feet, right? You
Hmm.
just get the rhythmic movement pushing into the wall to move more right? So like decentralizing the pain from the location. So say it's like right in the hip joint and it's like,
Right,
or
right,
it's
right,
right in the
right.
lower back, or it's right, right? And then you're just like getting that pulsation moving, connecting the brain, connecting the connectome, like down through the more peripheral nervous system, right? Like into the legs,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
regrowing the snake,
Moving
right?
the awareness too. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
it's calming, it stimulates the
yeah.
parasympathetic nervous system, it shuts off the sympathetic response. I mean, it's not the most exciting thing and it doesn't look
Right,
like
right.
highly specialized, but you start to
Well,
get more into that
yeah.
infantile movement of like reconnecting with, oh wait, I'm gonna be lying down before I'm standing up.
Right, right. Yeah, I like anything that puts the focus away, especially initially from the area that hurts, right? Because people put so much emphasis on it that you want to come back to it eventually, right? Especially like for a hip, for example, the first thing people usually do is check their rotation and check their flexion or whatever, right? Like get very hip specific movement. But anything that gets you thinking about the whole body and the brain and the nervous system, and I think that's a great way to start. That's a good like foundational principle, so to speak, right? Like get the area that hurts is rarely where the problem is, in my opinion.
Right. And then back to the mind, right? Back to the mind and the nervous system, there's like an overdrive, right? There's a pathway
Yes.
that's an
Yeah.
overdrive. And we're like, wait, there's other pathways, right?
Yeah. And that's where the awareness is, right? It's like what's that saying where attention goes, energy flows, right? And it's like
Mhm.
it's an obsession, right? It becomes like everything, right? How do I get rid of this? You're trying to control this thing, and like, yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's huge. It's huge. And I think it's what's missing a lot in like the general advice, right? Especially, you go to a doctor, it's literally this, it's breaking the body into little pieces, it's like, this is the problem, your hip. Let's do an MRI on the hip.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but again, if you
And then we're going to
yeah,
find something, right? We're
right.
always, I mean, if you
You're
look
always
at me,
gonna
I'm
find
50
something.
years old. I've been an athlete my whole life, and I love adrenaline sports. So I love mountain biking fast. I love skiing fast. So I've had crashes. Like you're going to
Yeah,
find
yeah,
stuff. If you look, you're going to find stuff. And then say you
totally.
operate there. Now you have, let's talk about what happens in the, like sort of like I mean, one of the things that I heard, I can't remember where I was listening, if it was you or someone else, but it was basically around like most physical therapists right now are being trained in post-operative care. They're not
Mhm.
being trained. So the money in the industry goes to post-operative care. It doesn't actually go to preventing the operation. So if we're seeing a physical therapist that's been highly trained in post-operative care, let's say 90% of their education is like what to do after someone's come out of a hip surgery or after a knee replacement or after a disc surgery on their spine. When you go preventatively, like their tools are much more limited, right, than
Yeah.
what's actually available to human wisdom right now.
No, I mean, that's a really good point. I think physical therapists are not trained in chronic pain, like chronic pain, chronic joint pain, like, is just different. And I think not just post-operative, but even like when you get to, so like when I went to the doctor and got diagnosed with an FAI and labral tear, they sent me to a physical therapist. Like their goal it's not really to help me avoid surgery. It's kind of like to get me ready for surgery, right? One of the
That's
physical
right.
therapists said to me like, oh, you got FAI, you got to go to surgery. Like that was a quote. I have that in some of my like articles and my YouTube videos. It's like that's what he said to me. And I thought, like, aren't I was like 4 physical therapists
And
before
you're 25 years old at the time or
oh
something
yeah,
like
I
that.
was so young. Like, yeah, like early 20s. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy, the body's so resilient. And if, we just need to give it the right prompts and like,
And regenerative. It's resilient
yeah.
and it's regenerative. Yeah, keep going.
And we're getting the opposite prompts at these places. We're getting told that our body is like failing us and that, it's broken and that we need to go in there and start. Yeah. I mean, you're literally, when you get the surgery, you're breaking, it's like, you're fine. And then you're breaking something and now you need to heal, and then you need to not only heal the surgery, but the initial problem also. So many people reach out to me who, the hip labor, I try to be careful when I say things about like surgical interventions, right? Because people are very protective over it and, they make decisions about their bodies. And I think when you like labral tear just surgeries, hip arthroscopic surgery to fix labral tears just don't have a good track record, right? There's just not good researches and support that is helpful. Then there's like hip replacements, right? Which is kind of like like a whole other animal. Like you're getting literally a new hip, right? And I think people do get a little bit more value out of that, maybe, but usually, right, people don't want to get a hip replacement, and that's the point, to repair the labrum. It's like that's a way to avoid hip replacement, but most people still get hip replacements, right? So like, why not just skip that part, right? And in a few years, try something else, try different things, and in 5-10 years, I think the fear is like, oh, I'm gonna get this, I'm gonna fix the labrum so I don't need to get the hip replacement. But most people will still get it, right? So.
Yeah. It also brings up this, I have this friend, childhood friend, who became a MD, and she had struggled with fertility, and then she had hip replacement before 45, I think, or right around 45. So again, we step back, like a global perspective of the physiology or a holistic perspective, whether we're in Eastern medicine is so much better of a holistic understanding of the physiology. We'd say, well, if you have crown of the head and you have the root chakra, and all these issues are happening right around the hips, the reproductive organs, the first and second chakra, there's clearly not good circulation. There's clearly not a regenerative energy there. So it's like infertility. Well, we can get infertility drugs. Hip issues. Okay, we can get hip replacement surgery. Neither of those things are actually working with the baseline issue of like not enough energy is circulating in the first and second chakra areas, that whether we call it Kundalini energy or nervous system pattern generator, right? That like there's a blockage down low, right? And like you're saying, it's connected to the mind, it's connected to movement, it's connected to how our beliefs, right? It's connected to fear, and this outsourcing of someone else can fix this for me, and I can go unconscious. Right, or I can take the pill and I can have the whatever, I can have the fertility, whatever procedures done to my body, and I can take the hormone pills, and I can go in and get a hip replacement and get this cut open and insert, new pieces inserted, and then do the physical therapy. There's this lack of baseline, exactly what you're saying, like what can I do? How can I awaken? How can I reconnect? How can I rewire my mind and my nervous system globally and see what happens next?
Whether it's a, fertility problem or a hip problem, I think these things aren't only those problems, right? They're like a human being problem, right? And I think that's, and, I try not to, because and I always say this, because there are reasons you need doctors, and they're important, right, in our society, and for many reasons, but the understanding, having the wisdom and I think the experience to understand what those things are, like oftentimes like, oh, that's a me problem, right? That's like a brain and movement problem, or like something else, or what you're describing in the chakra stuff like that. That takes wisdom and experience, I think, just like, as you said, like soul searching and self-searching of like understanding, like, okay, like I get gout sometimes, right? Like that's a doctor thing. And that's like whatever, or like that's what helped me, for example, right? In that, with that thing, so I think also just like understand, I think everyone has their own kind of way of navigating health in the world, but just knowing when to go in which direction, I think is super important.
Yeah. And then I think part of the other problem is like what's covered by insurance, right? Because people have often got a job because they wanted the security of insurance, but then what insurance covers might not be what they actually want for themselves. But then they're trapped in a system, right? That's
a really good point. I just had a client who just told me he got a hip labral tear surgery that didn't help him, and it was $90,000, And then I charge like a few $100 to meet with me. And I'm like, oh, am I charging too much? Like $90,000, that client never pays. And that's a lot of money. You do a few of those in a month. I mean, yeah. And no one even looks at it, right? Like the client, the patient doesn't know about it, right? Because like you said, the employer pays for it, or the insurance company pays for it.
Yeah. But it is starting to bankrupt companies. Interestingly enough, like I've worked with some people that were working in Fortune 100 companies, these huge multinational companies, and their medical costs are so high, right? Their healthcare costs for their employees are so high that it's essentially starting to bankrupt some of these bigger companies.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
And I
it'll be
think,
interesting to see what happens, like the shakedown, right? As people start having more of their paycheck going to that, right? To their healthcare benefits, lower quality of life. And then at some point they might realize that, like, oh wait, what happens if I don't, kind of like you, what if I switch industries? What if I empower myself? What would I put my money into? And I think this is a really big question of, like,
yeah.
say your family's putting $20,000, $30,000 a year into insurance, and insurance is giving you these surgeries, right? And then your premiums keep going up, right? What happens if you actually had that cash, had some sort of like emergency policy, and then, like, how would you actually invest that 20, 30,000 in wellness, to seeing people like you, or being in my club Thrive? Like, and I think these are some of the bigger questions that are really underneath these labral tear surgeries and these hip replacement surgeries.
No, I like that. And I know, I think, I think there are companies that maybe try to think about this question, right? It's like, how do we, because you're changing everything, right? You're changing it. Like, I think that, they offer personal training, like, you could get free personal training, or there's like this wellness area, but it's just, I think it almost goes against like the corporate culture, right? It's just like it's so hard to change it. It's like the company is profit driven. They need people to make money, right? And it's unhealthy to work so much. It actually, it makes you unhealthy. It makes your body unhealthy. You need to move.
Yeah.
Like I still go to the law office once a week, full time. I work twice a week, but I go into the office once a week. I'm there at 9 and I leave at like 6. And I'm in the office in a chair. I only do that.
Are you sitting the whole time? Yeah.
I'm sitting the whole time, and I feel it, right? Like it's almost good for me to do that, because I could connect with my clients a little bit.
Yeah, you can relate. Yeah.
Right. So, but it sucks. I mean, my whole, I'm better. I think it's almost the one thing that makes sitting all day in an office worse.
Yeah.
Is ruminating about how bad it is for you, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's things you could do. You get up, you walk, you move around, but if you do it 5 days a week, it's not healthy.
If anyone's listening, and if you just actually calculate the number of hours, I think it's really important to calculate the number of hours you're sitting a day. And that can take, like, for some of you who your days are different over the course of a week, like just do the average over the week and track it, just like people do food journaling. So if we track it, like, say we wake up and we sit in a chair and drink coffee or eat breakfast, right? Or maybe we're scrolling through our phone, but we're in a sitting position. It's like, well, you got to count those hours. If you're commuting, you got to count those hours, unless you're standing on the train. If you're then sitting at work, you got to count those hours. If you come home and eat dinner and you're sitting, you got to count that hour. And then if you sit on the couch, you got to count, and just get a count.
Yeah.
Get a baseline.
Yeah. Well, I think it's sitting in a chair at the office is like, you're 90 degrees, same position. You're so static. Variety in sitting, like right now I'm sitting on the floor, and like you said, you can move around with what you're on. I can also change my position, right?
Yeah.
And I just think changing positions often. So it's not sitting on a chair is bad, but what's bad about it, I think what makes it bad is that you do it for so long.
Yeah, I mean, even though, like, when I was growing Yoga Healer in my 40s, and I was sitting, I was doing a lot of content generation, a lot of coaching online, and I was sitting in a chair, and I didn't have, in the chair itself versus sitting on the floor where your spine's more upright. Like if you're right now in Virasana, where you're sitting on your heels, right? Like kneeling, right? That actually keeps the spine erect, and it changes the circulation in the head of the femur bones, versus sitting in the 90-degree angle in the chair. So even if you sit in this position for a while and you get up, your feet might be asleep, you get this surge of blood back into your toes, back into your calves, back into your, right? And so what I actually had was degeneration in my spine, in like L3 through L5, like the beginning of sclerosis in the spine at 50, even though I'm super active, super athletic. And I had to look at that and be like, what is my posture like when I'm in the chair? And I'm like, it's collapsed in my lower spine. What the fuck? Like, I know better. I know, I mean, my listeners are going to be like, really, Cate? But I know a lot better. But if it can happen to me, I just think of the person who has had a desk job for 20 years, who hasn't been on the yoga mat and hasn't studied exercise physiology. And
Yeah, I think awareness is huge, right? Just bringing, I mean, I think one thing I struggle with sometimes is like telling people, because there's no way out of it for them, right? Like you have to get paid. This is how you get paid in our economy. You have to sit in a chair, so what can you do about it? And I
do
think,
you though? Do you have to sit in a chair? Like, can't you flip a wastebasket over on the desk and put your laptop up there? I mean,
oh, yeah. So I think that's where it gets to, right? It's like, well, what do you do about it, right? It's like
yeah,
you can get the standing desk. I also don't think standing in the same position all day long is great.
no,
So
no,
something that like goes up and down. They have
yeah.
those things that go up and down. And like we're saying, be on the floor more. I think you might be the weird person in the office,
Or
but
you're
that
going to be
might be
weird.
okay.
If you're not
Yeah,
going to be
yeah,
sick, you're going to be weird. You're going to be weird
right,
or sick right now. So it's like,
right. Yeah,
right?
that's true. That's true. Yeah, yeah. And like, I think the social context and like, is makes it, that's one of the most challenging parts for people, right? Is like, do you want to be like, I think the standing stuff is much more normal, but if you were to like, and
But
the
it's
thing
only normal now because some people were abnormal
Sure,
10 years
exactly,
ago, right? So,
exactly. Yeah. And it takes courage to do it, and like
yeah,
it's your health, it's your life. Do what you got to do, totally. But I do think that, and that's like a psychological piece, right? It's like
yeah,
what's this fear of judgment of others, right? Like now we're going, you could go into that.
yeah.
Right?
Talk
So
about that. Go for it. Go
yeah.
off on that for a minute because that's
Well,
really
no,
where
I
it's
mean,
heading,
well,
right?
yeah, I mean, that's at the heart of what you're doing at the office, right? I mean, people, you sit, you're like a good soldier, right? You're in your chair, you're just typing away, doing what you're doing, and you just don't want anyone, you don't want to stand out in any way, negative
Yeah.
or positive, right?
So
So,
my advice to people like that is like, go find, there's another weirdo, like there's someone else or
oh
whatever you
yeah,
want to call it, right? There's someone
totally.
that's, I mean, the weirdo right now is called the biohacker or the innovator. That's the
Oh yeah,
positive
yeah,
terminology,
yeah.
right? There's someone already around your office that maybe you'll watch them and they're doing walking, talking meetings,
Mm.
right? Maybe they step outside, they take a meeting on Zoom outside on the roof, or maybe there's someone who's using the stairs.
Yeah, yeah,
Right,
it's a
maybe
good
there's
point.
someone
Yeah.
who's like got the whatever, the 64-ounce water bottle sitting at their
Right,
desk,
yeah,
and they're like, that. Like, do you
yeah.
see those water bottles that like literally cheer people on as they drink more water,
Oh
depending on
no, I
the
haven't.
level?
Oh, that's funny.
So it's like beginning of the day, it's full, and then it's like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
good
yeah.
job, you got 12 ounces in, and then it like literally
I,
you hit different levels, and it has a different
yeah.
message for you.
I think I think also with this, it's very hard. Like people may take like an all in approach, right? Like all in or nothing. Like,
Mm,
I'm either going to be the weirdest person in the office or I'm going to be nothing, right? I'm just going to, so it's like taking like baby steps, maybe starting with the water bottle, starting with the standing, starting with and then in 2 years, maybe you're doing exercises in the office, by yourself, which is, you can't just go, it's not an overnight thing, right? So I think it's
yeah.
like, it takes time. Yeah.
Well, and I really sense, with intermittent fasting, when I wrote this intermittent fasting book a few years ago, I was like, intermittent fasting and intermittent movement, right? Like that's how
Mhm.
humans used to move as primates,
Yeah.
right? It's like, it wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to get up and exercise for 30 minutes and then sit all day, right?
Mhm.
It's
Right,
like,
right, right.
even those of you who have a dog that isn't contained in a yard or on a leash, I watch what my dog does, and we live really quite rurally.
Uh-huh.
She'll wake up and she'll do the terrain. Like she'll get a mile in before breakfast, always. This morning she was trying to catch a magpie. It was hilarious. There's no way in hell she's ever going to catch a magpie, but she was giving it a roll.
Yeah.
The
Yeah. Yeah.
magpies tease dogs and cats. So they just like had this
Funny.
game going. And then she comes back from that, has her breakfast. And then she's like right back out, checking
Yeah.
out the neighbors, doing the thing. Then she'll take a nap. Then she'll get back up, she'll do another patrol, right? Then I'll take her on a walk or a bike. And and it's like this is natural mammalian movement patterns. So for me, it's like, oh, how do I get back into that? So my daughter has a trampoline, so I go and I jump for 5 minutes between meetings.
Nice.
Right. So it's like those little things. And if you work in an office and there's a building, and there's stairs, go check out the stairs every couple hours.
Yeah. It's really is that, I think it's more movement. It really is that simple, like as much as you can, I think, yeah, seeing dogs in like a natural environment, like I don't have one, but my friends do, and we go for hikes and I just see them, they're just so happy. It's so natural, they're just like in their happy place. But like us, when we're in the woods and we're in a trail, this is like, I mean, I get it. I get this feeling of like I'm home and I'm back and I want to go like just like climb and do stuff, But I think for some people, there's like when you're like so ingrained in society, it's like there's something holding you back, right? There's like this feeling of just like being in the office of like I can't be the weird whatever, do this. There's like something there, this conditioning, right?
Yeah.
There's this energy there. It's like, oh, I don't want to just. But what, what is that? And like the only way you overcome that is just do it, right? You just do the run and hold the stick in your hand for a few minutes, There's this quote of like, I like this recently, like Robert Bly, I forget the book that he wrote, something about, it's like something about it's like masculinity. Oh, Iron John is called the book.
Oh yeah. My husband has that book. Yeah, that's
good especially
book.
like I'm like in my mid-30s and it's like it's you're kind of getting away from the young life that the drinking and whatever and you becoming more family oriented. So there's this line there's like, you don't need to be the wild man, you just need to be in touch with the wild man. I really like that, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of pressure to like people, like when I was young, I'm like, oh, I hate the office, I'm done, I need to like go run around in the woods. And there's like this so I'm actually certified in MoveNet. It's like a natural movement, right?
Yeah.
Personal training thing. And I got really inspired by their marketing because it was all like this awesome movement. Irwin, like the head of the company, was just like moving around New Mexico and with all these rocks. And it's like, oh, I want to be that, But now that I'm a little older and wiser, it's like, I don't need to be that. I just need to I need to feel that sometimes, You need
be in touch with that.
Yes.
So
but still,
multi-dimensional.
Right.
Right? Like we're so multidimensional, right? So it's like, oh, you can be the lawyer and then you can crawl around for 10 minutes, and it's, if anyone has children or pets, like they love nothing more than to like crawl around on the floor with them.
Yeah. That's, I have we have an 8-month-old now and I'm just crawling around all day long. And I'm like, I do my exercises later and I'm like, why do like, I do these like kind of like baseline things, just like, circles and ankle circles. I'm like, why does everything feel so much easier? Because my body's been moving all day, right? I've been like using these things that I never use, and it's awesome. And
you're back in primal movement, right? You're back in the very beginning.
Contralateral, just like it's cool. Yeah.
Awesome. So if people want Happy Hips, because you have this online program, Happy Hips, just tell people a little bit about that and then where to find it.
Sure. So it's just, so I think I was thinking about how I would, how I should say my name, because people might Google my name and it's spelled a little weird. So it's Max with a K, M-A-K-S, and Resnick is just R-E-Z-N-I-K, right? So Z and a K, and then just, it'll come up, Happy Hips, Max Resnick. And the program is everything we talked about, movement and psychology, brain and movement, because that's what makes people feel better. That's what matters.
Awesome. And we're doing a Primal Habits Challenge starting June 21st. And so we'll put some of your YouTube videos in our Primal Habits Challenge and get people.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And thank you for having me. This was my first podcast and it was a great experience.
Oh, yay.
Yeah.
Fun. Yeah. Sweet. All right. Well, we'll be in touch. Take care.
Thanks, Kate. Bye-bye.
Bye.